I didn't sleep the night Tessa handed me that folder. I just sat there at my desk, long after she'd left, with my hand resting on the manila edges like it might bite me. The logo on the cover, a sleek, cold blue emblem I once helped Gregory design on our honeymoon napkins, felt like it was watching me. I opened it. The numbers were worse than I thought. The company Gregory built his reputation on, G&H Capital, was crumbling from the inside out. Bloated management, unethical partnerships, PR disasters he couldn't spin his way out of anymore. The board was desperate. And Gregory? Nowhere to be found on the front lines. I stared at his name on the last page. Still listed as CEO. My jaw clenched. Tessa had given me more than a challenge. She had handed me a reckoning. The next morning, I showed up to her office early, before sunrise. Before the city shook off its sleep. She was already there, typing at her desk like the night had never ended. I stood in the doorway. I want in. She didn't look up. I knew you would. Over the next 2 weeks, everything moved at breakneck speed. Legal teams, auditors, analysts. I signed NDAs so thick they could have been used as doorstops. But behind the scenes, Tessa was orchestrating something bigger. She didn't want to just acquire G&H Capital. She wanted to dissolve it. Burn it down. Build something better from the ashes. She wanted me to lead it. I spent hours studying the company. Its assets, its rot, its secrets. I knew that world from years of hearing Gregory talk about it over wine and roast chicken. Knew the names he feared, the clients he courted, the competitors he belittled, but now I saw it from the inside, and what I saw made me sick. It wasn't just about money. It was about ego. About deals made over the backs of vulnerable families. About marketing campaigns that targeted fear. About Gregory, the man who once told me leadership belonged to men, signing off on policies that quietly pushed women out of upper management. He had built a house on sand and then blamed the wind. So I got to work. We set up meetings with the board of G&H. Tessa came with me to the first one, but she let me lead. The room was filled with old men in expensive suits, most of them still clinging to the hope that someone like Gregory would save them. I walked in wearing navy, hair pinned back, no jewelry, no softness. I let silence fill the room before I said anything. Then, with steady eyes and a colder voice than I thought I could summon, I said, "You need a CEO who can clean this mess up. And I know your mess better than any of you. Because I lived it." They didn't smile. They didn't even nod, but they listened, and that was the beginning. Within 3 weeks, I was in, and Gregory had already left the company under the guise of taking a sabbatical. The rumors said he was somewhere in the Mediterranean, licking his wounds and romancing a yacht designer 20 years younger. He hadn't publicly stepped down, but the board had pushed him out. Cowards never say goodbye. My first day in the CEO chair didn't feel triumphant. It felt like surgery. The building was glass, steel, and silence. No one greeted me. No welcome banner. Just a desk. A nameplate. And a locked drawer with Gregory's initials still on the key. I opened it. Inside, 2 Cuban cigars, a miniature golf club, a bottle of scotch, and a note in his scrawl. "This job isn't for the faint-hearted." I put everything in the trash, and then I called a staff meeting, every floor, every team. I stood at the front of the main auditorium and looked out at a sea of faces, some curious, some skeptical, a few outright hostile. I saw the surprise ripple when I introduced myself. "I'm not here to decorate the title," I said. "I'm here to rebuild. And that means some of what you know is going to change. Fast." No applause. Just silence, but sometimes silence is the sound of gears shifting. The weeks that followed tested every nerve in my body. I gutted departments that had become echo chambers. I brought in people who challenged me. Women. Minorities. Former interns who had been passed over again and again. I made enemies fast. One afternoon, a man named Bruce, middle management, red tie, louder than he needed to be, stormed into my office unannounced. Slammed a report on my desk. "You're ruining everything Greg built," he spat. I stood slowly. Met his eyes. "Greg built a boys' club. I'm building a business." He left. He resigned 3 days later. Good riddance, but not everyone resisted. Some employees, ones who had been silent for years, started speaking up. Sharing stories. Ideas. One woman from accounting, Sheila, told me she hadn't had a raise in 5 years despite doing the work of 3 people. She got her raise. And a promotion. I spent late nights poring over the foundation of the company, correcting decades of negligence and greed. The more I cleaned up, the more pushback I got, from former allies of Gregory, from press outlets he used to control, even from anonymous threats. But I didn't flinch, because with every meeting, every deal, every change I made, I remembered his words, "Women are better suited for support roles," and I used those words like fuel. One evening, as I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new office, Boston sprawling below me in lights and breath, Daniel walked in. He didn't say anything. Just handed me a folder. Inside, Photos, Gregory. On a yacht, laughing, arms around a woman with bleached hair and a bikini that looked like it was made of fishing line. There was a note clipped to the front. He's coming back. I turned to Daniel. Let him. Because this time, I wasn't the one being left at a gas station, this time, I was the one behind the wheel. The morning after Daniel handed me those photos, the city felt different. I'd grown used to its hum, the rhythm of commerce and caffeine that pulsed through Boston's veins, but that morning it felt quieter, like it was holding its breath. Maybe I was holding mine too. I didn't look at the photos again. I didn't need to. Gregory's grin, stretched across sun-soaked skin and glossy arrogance, was etched into my memory. The woman beside him might have been beautiful, but I didn't see her. I saw what he'd built, and what I was rebuilding without him. He was coming back. That's what the note said. What it didn't say was how, or when, or why. It didn't matter, because I was ready, and being ready didn't mean I was calm. It meant I was clear. The day unfolded like any other: meetings, strategy calls, damage control, but beneath every polite nod and coffee refill was a current of tension. I told no one about the photos. Not yet. Not even Tessa. She'd know when. It was time. By midday, my inbox had begun to change. Invitations to exclusive industry dinners I hadn't been included in before. Requests for interviews. 2 offers to buy the company outright. I could feel it. The narrative was shifting. They weren't betting on Gregory anymore. They were watching me. Calculating. Testing, and then the phone rang, not my office phone. My personal line. Only 5 people had that number. Daniel was one of them, but it wasn't Daniel, Lilliane. The voice slid through the receiver like silk dipped in scorn. And Gregory. I didn't speak. He continued. Saw your little presentation last week. Strong performance. Very motivational. Still, I said nothing. Silence doesn't suit you, he said. But I suppose it's better than the alternative. Gloating. I exhaled, low and slow. I don't gloat, Gregory. I lead. He laughed. Softly. Almost fondly. Lead? You don't lead, Lilliane. You perform. You perform competence. Confidence. You walk into boardrooms and wear navy and hope they don't notice your voice shakes when you speak. My hand clenched the phone. Is there a point to this call? Oh, there's always a point. A pause. Then, I'm coming back. And when I do, I'll take back what's mine. I smiled. GNH was never yours. It was a fortress built on borrowed time. And now it's mine. Which means the only thing waiting for you here is a security badge that doesn't work. The line went dead. For a moment, I let the silence sit. Then I turned to my computer and drafted a company-wide memo. Subject: change is not a threat. It wasn't long. Just a reminder that we were shifting toward integrity. That our foundation was no longer fear or favoritism, but merit. That everyone, from janitor to junior analyst, had a voice. And that leadership wasn't a title. It was a service. The reply count hit triple digits before the hour was out, and then came the board meeting. Tessa was there this time, sitting beside me in a steel gray pantsuit that could have doubled as armor. The room was tense. One seat remained conspicuously empty. Is this necessary? One of the older board members asked. We have a strategy. We have a CEO. Gregory's input isn't required anymore. Then why is he scheduled to speak? Today? I asked. Murmurs. Shuffling papers, the door opened, and Gregory walked in, tan. Smiling. Wearing a linen suit that belonged on a deck, not a boardroom. He nodded to a few of them. Ignored me entirely. Gentlemen, he began, and of course, Miss Kavanaugh. He always used my last name when he wanted to diminish me. I've returned because I believe GNH needs direction. And while I applaud the admirable attempt at leadership, he gestured vaguely toward me. It's clear the market still associates this brand with my name. I leaned forward, and what the market remembers, I said, is a company embroiled in scandal, lawsuits, and leadership that fled when the foundation cracked. We don't need memory. We need momentum. He smirked. Nice line. Who wrote it for you? I smiled back. The same woman who restructured your failing departments and raised investor confidence by 22% in 6 weeks. The room shifted. Eyes darted. A few quiet nods. Gregory's smirk faded. I built this, he said. No, I said. You inherited it. Then you hollowed it out from the inside and painted the walls with your name. I'm the one laying new bricks. He stepped forward. Do you really think they'll follow you over me? I stood. They already are. And I walked out. I didn't wait for applause. I didn't need it. Outside the boardroom, Tessa caught up with me. Bold move, she said. Necessary one, I replied. She nodded. He's going to fight dirty. Let him. Because the thing about men like Gregory? They think the battlefield is theirs. They forget that women don't play the same game. We build new ones. That night, I got an email from an investor Gregory once called dead weight. She wanted to meet. Said she believed in what I was doing. I stared at the screen for a long time before responding. Then typed 2 words, let's build. I met her at a cafe tucked between an abandoned bookstore and a boutique shoe shop in Beacon Hill, the kind of place where the cups are hand-thrown pottery and every pastry looks like a sculpture. The investor, Veronique Layton, was already seated, black espresso in hand, no sugar, no cream, no nonsense. Her eyes tracked me as I approached like she'd already made up her mind, and this meeting was either a formality or a final test. I wasn't sure you'd respond, she said. As I sat across from her, I wasn't sure you'd reach out. A smile tugged briefly at the corner of her mouth. She was older, maybe in her mid-60s, and carried herself with the kind of economy only self-made women possess. Every gesture was deliberate. Every word had weight. I watched what you did with the audit team, she said, cutting straight through the pleasantries. That wasn't cleanup. That was surgery. I nodded once. There's more coming. She sipped her espresso. Good. Because what you're building, it matters. But more importantly, it threatens all the right people. I felt my spine straighten. Veronique leaned forward. Here's what I'm offering. I buy out the remaining shares Gregory's allies are clinging to. Quietly. Then I back you publicly. With that comes leverage, capital, and more eyes than you may be ready for. I didn't blink. Why me? She studied me for a moment. Because you're the first woman to stand at that podium and not flinch. You didn't blink when they threw Gregory back in your path. You didn't back down when the media called you temporary. And you sure as hell didn't wait for permission. I felt the words settle into me like heat. She slid a leather folder across the table. My lawyers are ready. Just say the word. I signed before the cappuccino I ordered even hit the table. By the end of the week, Veronique's name was all over the financial pages. Not in flashy headlines, but in the footnotes, the ones that matter. The ones real players read. Gregory noticed. He went silent for 3 days. Then the real attacks began. Anonymous articles flooded mid-tier business blogs, all hinting at my emotional instability, my lack of long-term vision, and, laughably, my reliance on feminist tokenism. At first, I ignored them. Until I realized. The damage wasn't just online. A junior team leader, Melissa, brilliant, sharp-eyed, one of the first women I promoted, came to my office teary-eyed. They said I was promoted because I'm like you. Not because I earned it. I didn't hesitate. I took her by the hand, walked her straight to the main floor, stood her on a chair in front of the team. She earned it, I said. Every damn day. Anyone who disagrees can explain why they didn't have the spine to do what she does. Not a single word was spoken against her. But the silence this time was proud. After that, things shifted. The narrative online began to crack. Real journalists started fact-checking the smear pieces. Employees, some who never spoke before, started posting about the changes they'd seen, the opportunities they'd earned, and the culture we were fighting to create. Gregory responded by taking it public. He called a press conference. Daniel warned me the night before. I remember standing in my kitchen, sleeves rolled up, stirring a pot of soup like I was still someone who had time for recipes. He placed his phone on the counter, screen lit with an invitation graphic for Gregory's State of the Company address. He's going for optics, Daniel said. And he's using your silence against you. I didn't look up. Then we won't be silent. The next morning, we booked a venue. Not a high-rise ballroom or a corporate event hall, but the old renovated mill we'd been converting into a startup incubator. The seats were folding chairs. The lights were rented. The live stream had glitches, but the story was real. I walked onto the stage in jeans and a button-down. No script. No teleprompter. Just me and the truth. Some people build companies like castles. Tall. Isolated. Expensive. Hard to enter. Easy to defend. They decorate it with power. They protect it with fear. But we're building something else here. Something messier. Something stronger. A company made of people, not polish. One that rewards work, not whisper networks. And, yes, I'm a woman. I lead differently. That's not a liability. That's the point. When I stepped off the stage, Tessa met me with a single word, broadcasted. Everywhere. And Gregory? He canceled his conference. For 3 weeks, things quieted. We got work done. Hired new talent. Built momentum. But I knew it wasn't over. I was right. The subpoena came on a Monday morning, tucked inside a vanilla envelope like it was just another memo. Gregory was suing me, allegations of corporate sabotage, theft of intellectual property, breach of fiduciary duty. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was a war tactic. My lawyer, Cynthia, who'd worked federal cases that would have made the Pentagon sweat, looked it over, then snorted. This is posturing. He doesn't have a case. But he does have the press, I said. She nodded. Then we give them a better story. That week, I did more interviews than I'd ever done in my life. NPR. Business Weekly. Even a late night show, where the host tried to flirt before realizing I wasn't playing, and through it all, I didn't talk about Gregory. I talked about rebuilding, about making boardrooms look more like the real world, about hiring women without asking if they plan to get pregnant, about letting people speak without lowering their voices. First point one night, after my last segment aired, I came home to find a box on my doorstep. No return label. No note inside, my wedding ring, tarnished. Bent slightly. I stared at it for a long time. Then I put it in the back of my drawer, behind an old paperback and a jar of thumbtacks, not because I wanted to keep it, because I wanted to remember what it cost me, and what I built instead. The next morning, Daniel handed me another folder. Veronique pulled the trigger. She's got 3 new board members lined up. They want to meet. I opened the folder. Inside, bios, portfolios, a handwritten note from Veronique, time to expand the table. I smiled. It wasn't just mine anymore. It was ours. The boardroom smelled like fresh varnish and tension. The long mahogany table, recently refinished for optics, gleamed under recessed lighting, but it was the chairs, new, wide-seated, high-backed, that felt symbolic. We weren't just making room, we were replacing thrones. Veronique's new appointees arrived precisely on time. 3 people. 3 sharp profiles in tailored suits. But it was their eyes that told me everything, curious, critical, unflinching. These weren't allies by default. They were observers. They'd lend power only if it was earned. I stood to greet them. First, Kemi Adewale. British-Nigerian, former CTO of a major AI firm, walked like she'd never once trailed behind a man. Next, Martin Reyes. Dominican-American, ex-union strategist turned venture advisor. His hands were calloused, his handshake firm, his reputation for flipping companies ironclad. And finally, Simone Bellamy. The only one not in a suit. Dark turtleneck. Slacks. No jewelry. No smile. Former federal ethics officer, each one represented not just a shift in power, but a recalibration of purpose. We didn't exchange pleasantries. Kemi spoke first. We've read the numbers. They're promising. But numbers aren't vision. Simone nodded, arms crossed. And promises aren't policy. Martin flipped a page in the dossier I'd prepared. So tell us, what's your plan for year 2? I didn't reach for the slides. I didn't click the projector. Instead, I pushed everything aside and leaned forward. Phase 1 was about survival, I said. Cleaning house. Rebuilding trust. Replacing noise with value. Phase 2 is about direction. Making GNH something it never was, transparent, progressive, human. That means implementing performance-based equity from top to bottom. Revamping maternity and caregiver leave. Restructuring our supply chain to reward sustainability over scale. Kemi raised an eyebrow. And how do you plan to make shareholders swallow slower growth for better ethics? I met her gaze. Because it's not slower. It's smarter. Short-term greed nearly killed this company. Long-term alignment will save it. Our clients are watching. They care who they're investing with. So we show them they're not buying into a corporation. They're buying into integrity. Martin closed the dossier. Good answer. Risky. But good. Simone stood. Then prove it. Pick one of your riskiest policies. Implement it. Now. And we'll see what your culture's made of. I didn't hesitate. Salary transparency. Martin let out a low whistle. Simone's expression didn't change. Interesting choice. Kemi finally smiled. Now we're watching. They left as quickly as they'd arrived. By the following week, every employee at GNH had access to a live dashboard, job titles, salaries, bonuses, and what percentile their compensation fell into compared to company averages. Anonymized. But real. The reaction was volcanic. Some were furious, others vindicated. Dozens of managers scheduled meetings, trying to justify disparities. Some had valid reasons. Most didn't. I held every one of them accountable. I made sure no one in HR slept for a week. And I didn't either. Melissa, the team leader. They once called a diversity token, discovered she was being paid less than a man 2 rungs beneath her who didn't have her certifications. She walked into my office, report in hand, jaw set like steel. I want to fix this. But not just for me. I nodded. You're leading the task force. Effective today. She smiled then. One of those rare, earned ones. The kind that reaffirms your reason for fighting. But Gregory wasn't done. 3 days later, a whistleblower report was filed against me anonymously, claimed I had misused company funds for personal legal fees. False. But loud. The press grabbed it with both hands. I called an emergency meeting with the board. The original members, the new ones, the advisors. I sat at the head of the table and placed a binder in front of each of them. Receipts. Timestamps. Legal authorizations. Every penny tracked. Simone read in silence. Then looked up. You knew this. Was coming. I didn't know the angle, I said. But I've lived with Gregory Hale. He's not original. Martin laughed once, short and hard. You're right about that. They voted unanimously to issue a public statement of support. Gregory's next move was sloppier. He leaked a personal email from our early marriage, one where I questioned whether I was cut out for corporate life. It went viral. I didn't hide that I went on record. Yes, I wrote that. Years ago. When I was surviving a marriage, not living a life. Self-doubt isn't weakness. It's honesty. And look where honesty got me. The clip made headlines. For the first time, the story shifted from scandal to strength. Women across the country started reposting it with the hashtag look where I am now.hr. Inboxes flooded with resumes from candidates who'd once assumed GNH wouldn't see them. We hired fast. We trained harder. And through it all, Daniel stayed close, always one step ahead of trouble, until trouble walked through our front door. Gregory.in person. He strode into the lobby flanked by 2 lawyers, demanded a meeting. Daniel intercepted him. She's in a board session. Gregory's voice was loud enough to echo. Then pull her out. It's her company, isn't it? Daniel didn't flinch. It's not yours. Security escorted him out. He shouted as he left, this isn't over, Lilliane. But it was. At least, that version of the war. That night, I walked to the roof of the building. No speeches. No phone. Just wind and silence. Sometimes you need the quiet to remember what power sounds like, because real power doesn't shout. It builds, and I wasn't done building yet. The next morning, I showed up before sunrise. Not out of necessity, my calendar wasn't full until 10, but out of instinct. When the world tries to shake you, your best weapon is momentum. And mine was relentless. The building was still asleep. Lights low, only a few early risers wandering the atrium. My heels echoed down the hall like a promise. I bypassed the elevator, took the stairs 2 at a time. I needed breath. I needed blood pumping. At the top floor, the lights in my office were already on. Daniel. He stood at the window, sipping coffee from one of the chipped mugs he refused to let me throw out. He didn't turn when I walked in. He's gone, he said. No press follow-up. No legal filing. No surveillance in the parking lot. I think he's finally realized he lost. I dropped my bag, let the silence hang. You believe it? I asked. Daniel finally looked at me. I believe in outcomes. Not men like him. I almost smiled. Almost. Then I sat at my desk and opened the quarterly report Veronique's team compiled. Numbers up. Attrition down. More female managers hired in the past 3 months than in the previous 5 years combined. Clients weren't just staying, they were bringing others. The shift was real, and it was time for the next fight. I called Tessa. I want a summit. She didn't ask what kind. Internal. Our top leaders, department heads, advisory council. 3 days. Offsite. Somewhere with fewer marble floors. She paused, then said, the retreat center in Vermont. Minimalist cabins. Wood stoves. Just Wi-Fi and cold air. Perfect. We sent the invitations that afternoon. Not mandatory. But strongly encouraged. Every one of them said yes. By the end of the week, we were convoying into the mountains. No suits. No screens. Just notebooks, scarves, and a hunger none of us wanted to admit. The first night, we didn't talk business. Just shared stories, what brought us to this place, what almost made us leave. There were tears. There was laughter that didn't feel like armor. The second day, we mapped values, not a mission statement, actual, lived values. What do we protect? Who do we uplift? What do we walk away from, no matter how profitable? Melissa led the most powerful session, a 2-hour exercise in power dynamics. We each had to write the last time we felt silenced at work. Then read it aloud. Even I shared. I was once told, I said, voice slow, that women are better suited to support roles because we're too emotional to make hard decisions. I believed that lie for years. I dressed it up as humility. But it was fear. The room went still. No one looked away. On the final day, Kemi joined via live stream. She didn't comment on the setting or our appearance. She got straight to it. You're ahead of the curve. Don't coast. Now is when you scale or stagnate. So tell me, what are you willing to bet? The question wasn't rhetorical. I stood, heart pounding. We bet on becoming the standard. We set the bar so high that any company trying to follow will have to leap just to see us. And they clapped. Not for me. For the fire back in Boston. Momentum became a flood. Applicants tripled. Partner firms requested co-branded initiatives. We launched a mentorship program that paired young professionals with executives, not just for coffee chats, but for shared projects, bonuses tied to mutual success. Then came the phone call. International. A private equity firm in Berlin. One of the biggest in Europe. They wanted a meeting. Said they'd been following the transformation. Veronique called me the night before. They'll test you. And they'll try to make you feel small before they offer anything real. Good. I said. Let them try. We flew out the next morning. The meeting room was stark, steel, glass, and 3 men in nearly identical suits. Their English was precise. Their questions sharper than any American board I'd faced. What if the trend of female-led firms plateaus? One asked. What if it doesn't? I shot back. They offered a number. Lower than expected. I didn't blink. I closed the folder. Thank you for the offer. But we're not selling momentum for modesty. Tessa gasped softly beside me. One of the men leaned forward, curious. The other 2? Flat faces. We'll revisit, they said. If your projections hold. They'll grow, I replied. And when they do, the price doubles. We left without shaking hands. By the time we landed in Boston, they'd called Veronique. Their offer doubled. I didn't take it. Not yet. But I knew now, this wasn't survival anymore. This was ascension. That night, I stayed late at the office. Alone. Lights low, city shimmering beneath me like a secret. Gregory's old nameplate was still buried in a drawer. I pulled it out. Held it, then I walked to the window and opened it wide. Boston wind doesn't whisper. It roars. I let it carry the weight of his name into the night. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. 2 weeks after the Berlin offer, we launched what I now consider our defining initiative, one that no competitor could copy because it wasn't a feature. It was a philosophy. We called it the Mirror Room. An internal review system designed not to grade performance, but to reflect power. Every senior executive was required to participate. Anonymous reviews. Multidirectional. Top to bottom. Bottom to top. Side to side. And here was the rule. Results went public inside the company. People thought I was insane. You're going to invite mutiny, one advisor warned. Leadership needs insulation. No, I told him. Leadership needs exposure. Tessa coordinated the tech side. Daniel handled the security protocols. I personally drafted the guiding questions. How does this person treat those with less power? How do they react when challenged? What do they apologize for, and what do they excuse? The rollout was shaky. Nervous laughter in hallways. Sudden upticks in politeness. But once it started, it roared. The mirror room didn't just reveal toxic behavior, it revealed the quiet brilliance of people who'd been ignored. Analysts who had changed the course of projects but were never credited. Assistants who predicted crises before managers even saw them coming, and yes, it revealed a few tyrants. 3 department heads stepped down within 2 months. 1 VP, the same man who once told me I dress well for a CEO, resigned after his report lit up like wildfire. Veronique simply said, "Good riddance," and we moved forward. The culture changed in ways I didn't expect. People stopped posturing, meetings became shorter, sharper, apologies became public, not private whispers. Even the elevator rides felt different, fewer blank stares, more nods. Like we were all finally breathing the same air. It was during this transformation that the media found its next target. Me again, but not because of Gregory. Not this time, because of my father. A journalist uncovered an old legal case, one I barely remembered. My father had once been accused of insider trading when I was in high school. Charges were dropped. But the suspicion lingered. They ran the story with my photo. Did she learn from the best, or the worst? It hit hard. Not because I was ashamed of him, but because it rewrote a wound I thought had scarred over. I called him. We hadn't spoken in 6 months. Not out of conflict, just space. He answered on the 3rd ring. His voice was quieter than I remembered. "Hi, Lil. I didn't even know they were digging." I said. "I did," he replied. "They reached out. I told them to go to hell. Didn't stop them." Silence. Then I asked, "Did you do it?" He took a breath. "No. But I didn't fight it as hard as I should have. I thought the truth would outlast the noise." We both knew better now. "I'm sorry it's hurting you," he said. "But I'm proud. Always." I swallowed hard. "Thank you." After we hung up, I crafted a statement. Not defensive. Not deflective, just honest. My story began long before I stepped into a boardroom. And like many stories, it includes chapters written by others. What matters is what we choose to write next. It trended for 3 days. Not because it was flashy, but because it was real. That week, our boardroom changed again. Simone stepped down. "I never stay longer than 18 months, she said. "You're past the point of needing ethics training wheels." Her replacement was unexpected. Daniel. He tried to refuse at first. "I'm not a boardroom guy," he said. "I'm your shadow, not your voice." "You've been both," I told him. "It's time people see what I've seen." He joined under one condition: he'd still keep a corner office 2 floors down. Still wear his black polo shirts. Still show up at 6 a.m. sharp. Fine by me. We marked his appointment with a small gathering. No speeches. Just shared glances and raised glasses, and then, as always, The next challenge knocked. An open letter, signed by 15 former GNH employees, all from Gregory's tenure. They accused the company of cultural betrayal. Called our initiatives performative idealism. Accused us of reversing decades of tradition. Point 1 even quoted Gregory directly, "We built this house. Now she's painting it pink." I read the letter once, then printed it. And at our next all-hands meeting, I read it aloud. When I finished, I looked out at the crowd. "I won't respond to ghosts," I said. "But I will say this, the foundation we stand on is only as strong as our willingness to repair it. And if pink walls make space for voices that were once silent, then let's paint every damn floor." The applause was real. Not loud. Not performative. Earned. The next morning, a single envelope waited on my desk. No return address. Inside, a handwritten note, "You're not leading a company. You're leading a movement. Don't stop." Underneath it, a photo of a girl. Maybe 10. Brown skin, big glasses, holding up a cardboard sign that read, "I want to be like her." I didn't cry, but I didn't speak for a long time either, because sometimes power isn't noise, sometimes it's what happens in the silence that follows a truth too heavy to ignore. The silence after that note didn't last long. Within a week, two things happened that would alter the course of everything I'd worked for. First, we were invited to keynote the Global Corporate Leadership Summit in Geneva, a slot typically reserved for tech billionaires, banking dynasties, or political ex-royalty playing CEO. The invite came directly from the summit's board chair, with one line typed at the bottom, "The world is watching. Say something worth remembering." And second, a call from my old mentor, Professor Emery, who once told me in college that I was too thoughtful to survive corporate America. "Seems I was wrong," he said. "I saw the open letter. I read your response. Lilliane, you're doing what we used to dream about." That line held more than nostalgia. It held a challenge. Because when the world listens, what you say becomes legacy or liability. I started writing that speech the same night. I locked my office. Turned off my phone. Stared at a blank screen for an hour. What did I want to say? Not just to CEOs or shareholders or skeptics, but to that 10-year-old girl in the photo. The one with glasses and a cardboard sign. The one who hadn't even met the world yet, but already knew she'd have to fight it. When the words came, they came slow. But they burned out. I didn't tell anyone what I was writing. Not even Daniel. Not Tessa. Not Veronique. By the time we landed in Geneva, the speech was memorized. Not rehearsed, lived. The summit venue was all white marble and high ceilings, echoing with languages from 5 continents and egos from every corner of power. Our panel was scheduled right before the closing gala. Prime time, they gave me 20 minutes. I used 19 and a half. I stepped on stage in black slacks, a crisp shirt, and no jewelry. No distractions. Just steel and fabric form. I didn't begin with credentials. Or numbers. Or Gregory. I began with a story. I was left at a gas station once. Not metaphorically. Literally. 1 in the morning, heels in my hand, car gone, phone buzzing with a goodbye text from a man who thought I'd stay broken. A quiet ripple through the room, but the real moment didn't happen then. It happened when I called for help, and it came. With people. With plans. With the beginning of something no one saw coming. I paused. Watched them lean in. Today, I lead a company that used to be called a boys' club. Now it's called a benchmark. We didn't get here by playing the old game better. We got here by rewriting the rules. More stillness. Less skepticism. I'm not asking you to follow. I'm asking you to question. What would your company look like if power wasn't the currency? If truth was? If kindness earned bonuses? If listening got promotions? I closed with this: if you build something worth remembering, the world will watch. But if you build something worth becoming, the world will follow. They didn't clap immediately, but when they did, it wasn't polite. It was seismic. After the speech, I walked off stage straight into a storm: requests, interviews, collaborations, even an offer to write a book. But it was what happened the next morning that mattered most. Tessa burst into my hotel room before I'd even had coffee. G&H just landed the Patel account. You know what that means? I blinked. No, they were Gregory's white whale. He courted them for 8 years. 8. They just signed with us in a single email. Subject line said, "We like how you fight." I sank into the chair. By the window, because it hit me. We weren't a recovery story anymore. We were a revolution. That week, I greenlit a global expansion strategy. Not aggressive. Not arrogant. Intentional. Offices in Cape Town, Singapore, and Toronto. Each one designed to operate with localized leadership, equity-first hiring, and what we now officially called the Mirror Room Protocol. I asked Melissa to lead the international rollout. She cried. Then she packed. The team was humming until the breach. A cyber attack. Small, but targeted. Someone tried to access employee reviews from the Mirror Room. Not customer data. Not financials. Just internal transparency files. It didn't take long to trace Gregory using an offshore proxy, 2 hired consultants, and 1 former disgruntled IT contractor. We got ahead of it. Issued a statement. Pressed charges. Made an example, but it wasn't the breach that stung. It was the realization. He still didn't understand that he thought this was about control. About information. About pulling levers in the dark, but what we'd built couldn't be hacked. Because it wasn't made of secrets. It was made of light, Daniel said it best, later that night, when we sat in the office kitchen, eating leftover pad thai out of takeout boxes. He keeps thinking you're building a castle. Something he can siege. But what you're building is a city. With doors open, lights on, and people who won't go back to silence. I looked at him, chopsticks paused in midair. And you? I asked. He smiled. I'm just the guy who makes sure the lights stay on. But I knew better. He was the one who found me in the dark, and now, we were the ones leading others out of it. By the end of that quarter, GNH was operating in 7 countries, applications crossed 200,000. Our retention rate hit a record high, and then a surprise.an invitation from the White House.an initiative on ethical business practices, labor rights, and gender equity. They wanted me on the advisory panel. I read the letter 3 times, then I called my father. He answered on the first ring. You're calling to brag, he said. No, I said. I'm calling because I'm scared. This is bigger than anything I imagined. He paused. It's always bigger than you imagine. That's why you don't stop. That's why you keep growing. I joined the panel, and when I walked into the West Wing for the first time, flanked by Secret Service and blinking against history, I whispered to myself the same words Gregory once used to diminish me: women are better suited for support roles, and I smiled, because he was right. We support economies. We support change. We support each other, and we do it with power the world is just starting to understand. The first time I stood in the Oval Office, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt quiet, like something inside me had stilled, not because it was over, but because everything that came next had to matter more. The panel meetings were sharp, structured, and filled with every kind of voice: activists, CEOs, economists, social workers. Each person at that table had a story and scars to match. It reminded me that leadership isn't earned once. It's earned again and again. Especially when no one's clapping. We debated wage equity and parental leave policies. But when it was my turn to speak, I shifted the conversation. The issue isn't just policies, I said. It's proximity. We write legislation for people we've never met. Until we change who's in the room, nothing will change outside of it. That line made the national press, but it was the after-hours meetings, behind closed doors, late nights, quiet voices, that shaped the real battle. One senator, mid-60s, white hair, sharp pinstripes, pulled me aside after day 3. You talk a lot about systems, he said. But systems don't bleed. People do. I looked him in the eye. And people build systems. So we hold them accountable. He didn't speak again. But he voted yes when it mattered. Back in Boston, everything moved faster. Our Singapore office surpassed its Q1 projections by 37%. Toronto launched its own version of the Mirror Room, complete with peer-led ethics councils. Melissa sent me a photo from Cape Town, the entire team standing in front of their new building, holding signs that read, "Power, shared." But not all news was clean. A whistleblower surfaced, not against us, but from within a competitor. They'd mimicked our values externally, while internally pushing out any dissenting voice. Worse, they used our language to mask their rot, and when it broke in the press, they dragged us into the narrative. Is ethical capitalism just marketing? One headline asked. I didn't flinch, because we'd done the work, but I did something unusual. I reached out to the whistleblower. Her name was Zoraya. Mid-30s. Former operations manager. Fired under the guise of restructuring. She met me in a diner 2 hours outside the city. Neutral ground. No cameras. She was wary. But not broken. I didn't want this, she said. I wanted change. Not fame. Not backlash. I believe you. We talked for 3 hours. About patterns. About fear. About how betrayal in a boardroom can feel worse than heartbreak. She had files. Records. And a request. I don't want another job. I want to build something that doesn't need whistleblowers to stay clean. I hired her the next day, director of ethics implementation, and when the media came calling, we gave them the full story. No spin. Just structure. That transparency turned the tide. Again, the public started distinguishing. We weren't perfect, but we were real. A few weeks later, during an internal leadership meeting, Veronique stood up. She held a tablet in her hand, face unreadable. Just got off a call, she said. Our valuation was just revised. We crossed $1 billion. No one clapped. Not because it didn't matter, but because it wasn't the point. The real moment came a few hours later, when a junior developer, Kayla, fresh out of a 2-year mentorship program, walked into my office and said, "Do we get to build more now?" And I said, "Yes. We build everything." We launched an internal initiative called Roots, Redistribution of Opportunity Through Support. Its goal? Identify employees without traditional access, first-gen college grads, refugees, people returning from incarceration, and fast-track them through mentorship, training, and leadership shadows. Roots wasn't charity. It was strategy. Within 6 months, 2 Roots graduates had taken management roles. One became our youngest project lead in GNH History. One of Gregory's old allies called it pandering. I called it a preview, but beneath the momentum, I began to feel something I hadn't felt since the gas station night: restlessness, not dissatisfaction. Not burnout. A whisper that something was next. I talked to Daniel about it one night on the roof. "I don't know what it is," I told him. "But it's growing. Like the ceiling of this job is lowering, inch by inch." He didn't give me platitudes. He just nodded. "You built this to outlive you. That means it's working." The realization knocked the air out of me. What if my greatest act of leadership wasn't expansion, but exit? I didn't act on it immediately. I watched. I measured. I spent time with the team in Cape Town. I hosted a town hall in Boston where the interns asked questions sharper than half the board, and then one morning, I walked into my office and saw Kayla, now managing her own dev team, standing at the glass wall, talking through something with 2 interns and a department head. No hierarchy, just minds, and I knew that it was time. I called Veronique. Told her what I was thinking. She didn't argue. She didn't push. She said, "Then we make sure the handoff is as powerful as the rise." We started the transition plan in silence. No announcements. No leaks, just groundwork. Roots leadership was consulted. The board was briefed. Daniel and Melissa co-led the succession advisory. It took 6 months. 6 months to build something that didn't end when I walked away, and when the announcement finally came, a simple press release, no fanfare, the reactions were louder than I expected. Some were shocked, others called it strategic brilliance, but the best message came in the form of a card, slid under my door. No name. No signature, just this: "You left the gas station and built the highway." I gave my final speech in the same auditorium where I first stood before the company years ago, the day I took the job no one thought a woman should have, but this time, the room was different. The lights were softer. The chairs rearranged in a circle instead of rows. No stage. No podium. Just people, the ones who stayed. The ones who built. Melissa introduced me, her voice steady, eyes fierce. She didn't just give us jobs. She gave us mirrors. And then she handed us the tools to build windows, walls, cities. I didn't have a script. I looked around that room, at the faces that had fought beside me, challenged me, carried pieces of this vision in their bare hands, and I said, when I started, I was afraid. Not of failure. But of being right. About how deep the rot went. About how easy it was to ignore. About how much it would cost to clean, but we cleaned. We broke glass and built frameworks. We outlasted ghosts. We turned apologies into policies. "I'm not leaving because I'm tired. I'm leaving because you're ready, and because my job was never to be the voice forever. My job was to prove the voice could exist." Silence. Then standing. Not applause. Standing, for each other. I stepped down. No fanfare. No music. Just a final look, then I walked out the door, into sunlight that felt like a beginning, not an end. The next week was quieter than I expected. No emails. No strategy decks. No emergency calls, just me, and a blank page. I took a train north, through pine valleys and snow-wrapped hills, to a cabin I'd rented years ago for a weekend I never took. I brought nothing but a suitcase and a journal. The first thing I wrote: "Who are you when no one needs saving?" It startled me. Because I didn't know the answer yet, but I was ready to find out. For the first time, I slept without setting an alarm. I made coffee slow. I walked barefoot through frost-lined paths and watched deer like they were coworkers. I finally had time to understand that I didn't plan what came next. It came to me. An email from Zoraya. She'd been quietly mentoring a group of young women in tech, most from underserved backgrounds. She called them Code Bloom. "Would you come speak to them?" she wrote. "They don't know who you are. But I think they'll recognize you." I said yes. The event was held in a converted warehouse with more heart than heat. Folding chairs. Half-eaten donuts. Nervous eyes. I didn't tell them about GNH. Or Geneva. Or Gregory. I told them about the gas station, and about the silence that came after. The kind that forces you to decide, do I disappear? Or do I drive? Afterward, one girl, maybe 17, said, "I didn't know women could be in charge and still have doubts." And I said, doubt isn't weakness. It's the doorway to real power. That night, Zoraya and I sat on the roof of the warehouse. Legs dangling over the edge, wind biting. You're not done, she said. No, I admitted. But it's not another company. It's not another boardroom. She didn't press. Just nodded. 3 months passed. I turned down 6 speaking gigs, for advisory roles, 2 ghostwriting offers. I read more than I had in 10 years. I wrote things that would never be published. I went days without opening my laptop, and then, quietly, I began to sketch something new. Not a company. A school, not for profit, for potential. A place where people who had been told they weren't leadership material could learn how to lead on their own terms. No degrees. No resumes. Just space. Tools. Mentors. Mirrors. I pitched the idea to no one. Instead, I emailed Daniel. The subject line read, "You still keep the lights on?" He replied 5 minutes later. "Always. Where do we start?" The first building was an old factory in Lowell. Brick. Drafty. Gorgeous in the way things are when they've survived. We named it The Forge. Because that's what it would be. A place where doubt becomes steel. Where overlooked becomes undeniable. Tessa joined. Melissa too. Zariah led the programming. Kayla donated the first round of computers. We kept the mirror room. We added a new protocol, the echo table. A weekly session where every voice was weighted equally, regardless of role, age, or experience. Within 6 months, our pilot cohort had tripled. One woman, a mother of 3 who'd been out of the workforce for a decade, gave a keynote at a local startup fest and got 3 job offers that same night. Another, a former grocery clerk with a criminal record, built an app that was adopted by 2 nonprofits. The Forge wasn't a success story. It was a field. We just lit the path, and then one afternoon, during a site tour with a potential donor, I heard her, the girl from the photo of big glasses. Same cardboard sign, only now, she was real. 12 years old. Came with a school group. Held her sign up with quiet pride. I want to be like her. The donor leaned over and whispered, "Do you know her?" I nodded. I used to. The girl with the cardboard sign didn't speak to me that day. She stood with her classmates at the edge of the tour group, wide eyes scanning the corners of the room like she was memorizing it all for later. The sign she carried looked handmade, Sharpie. Smudges, a crease down the middle, edges curling. But she held it like armor. I didn't approach her. I didn't need to. Some moments ask for distance. Reverence. Recognition without interruption. She was a mirror, and I saw myself in her in ways I hadn't allowed in years. The Forge grew faster than any of us expected. By our 2nd year, we'd launched 4 satellite spaces across the U.S., each one uniquely shaped by its city but built on the same spine, belief without condition. We didn't look for resumes. We looked for resilience. We didn't build pipelines. We built gardens, and still, people tried to categorize US.A. An article called us the anti-corporate bootcamp for soft-spoken leaders. They meant it as a compliment. I hated it, because we weren't anti-anything. We were for equity. For emergence. For the idea that leadership isn't inherited or taught, but uncovered, like pulling gold from river silt. The term, soft-spoken, clung to me for days. It echoed all the old narratives, that clarity without shouting is fragility. That silence means submission. So I hosted a session called The Strength of Stillness. We dimmed the lights. Removed the chairs. Everyone sat on the floor. No introductions. No hierarchy. For the first 15 minutes, we said nothing, then we went around the circle. Who taught you your silence was a flaw? I asked. The answers came slow. My first boss. My father. Every man in every meeting I ever attended. Myself. We stayed there for hours. And when the session ended, no one moved. We just breathed in the honesty, like oxygen. After too long underwater, that night, I wrote in my journal, noise isn't proof of presence. And quiet isn't the absence of power. We started incorporating those values into our curriculum. 1 module, negotiation without apology. Another, confidence doesn't yell. We taught them that presence isn't posture. It's consistency. It's choice, and that leadership doesn't begin when you speak. It begins when you listen. By then, press inquiries had started up again. They wanted to frame my story as a full-circle moment. From betrayal to boardroom to benevolence. Easy arcs. Digestible inspiration. I declined every interview. I wasn't a story. I was still writing, but something inside me shifted the day a former GNH intern reached out. Her name was Elena. She'd been quiet, sharp, observant, one of those people who said very little in meetings but sent follow-ups that rewired everything. I'm building something, she wrote. And I think you should see it. She invited me to a warehouse in Detroit. No address listed. Just coordinates. When I arrived, she met me outside in work boots and a hoodie with the sleeves cut off. You always liked strange places, she said. I smiled. I liked beginnings. Inside, I saw it, rows of desks. Wall-sized whiteboards. Half-painted murals. Laptops open. People moving like they had somewhere to go. Elena had built a co-op incubator, Tech Meets Community. Profit meets justice. I stole a lot from you, she admitted. Good, I said. I hope you steal more. She paused. I want you on our board. But not as a figurehead. I want you to teach. I'm not sure I'm meant for teaching, I said. That's not true. You've been teaching the world how to listen since the day you stopped yelling back. I said YES.IT felt like the right next place. Not center. Not spotlight. Just present. That same week, Melissa called from Cape Town. She was stepping down. I've done what I came to do, she said. And now I want to write about it. I laughed. A memoir? Not mine, she said. Everyone's. The ones who never got to tell theirs. We cried. Briefly. Then we made plans. A scholarship. For voices once silenced. Named after Melissa's grandmother, and that's when I realized what legacy actually is, not a headline. Not a statue. It's the echo, the hand that pulls another forward, the sentence that becomes someone else's first paragraph. That year, the Forge's alumni began to do what I had dreamed of in quiet. They outgrew us. One launched a healthcare nonprofit in rural Appalachia, another built a coding platform for girls in war-torn regions. A third, barely 21, ran for city council. And one every few weeks, I got a postcard. No return address. Always the same handwriting, still forging. I never found out who sent them. I didn't need to, because the point of this work, the real point, was never to be known. It was to make space. To take the bricks thrown at you and lay a path, and sometimes, if you're lucky, to walk it beside others until they can walk ahead of you. Late one evening, I returned to the gas station, the same one. Still open. Still humming with that fluorescent buzz. I stood there barefoot, heels in hand, not because I was recreating the moment, because I was reclaiming it. I stepped inside. Bought a bottle of water. Paid in cash. As I walked back out, a young woman behind the counter said, "You look like you've been somewhere." I turned to her. Smiled. I'd been building. And I kept walking, not away, but forward, into the kind of silence that isn't absence. Its arrival. After I left the gas station that night, something inside me shifted for good, not just because I'd closed the circle, but because for the first time in years, I had no script in my hand. No strategy on my calendar. Just a full breath and a clear sky. It's strange what you remember when the noise dies down, the texture of your own thoughts, the way your feet hit pavement when you're not rushing towards something, the music you used to like before you started listening to what people told you was productive. I rented a small apartment in a city where no one knew my name. No skyline. No boardrooms. Just rain on the windows and a tiny record player I found at a thrift shop. I went for long walks. I cooked slowly. I called my mother more. I wrote letters. I didn't send. I asked myself questions that didn't have to be answered right away. What do I love? Who am I outside of urgency? What would I create if no one ever saw it? The answers didn't rush in. They arrived like old friends. Hesitant. Familiar, and in the quiet, I began to write again, not essays or speeches or position statements. Stories. One about a girl who built a bridge out of glass and let people walk across it barefoot. Another about a woman who turned down a crown because she wanted to grow a garden. I didn't try to publish them. I didn't edit them into marketable arcs. I just let them be. That freedom was the real revolution, until, one afternoon, I got a call I didn't expect. Veronique. She never called without a reason. Her voice was clipped, but not cold. There's a problem. Not yours to solve. But I thought you should hear it first. She was right. It wasn't mine anymore, but the name she said next stopped me. Gregory. He'd resurfaced, only this time, not in business. In politics, running for office in a district that had been gutted by corruption, redrawn for profit, and sold off in pieces to the highest bidder. And somehow, he'd repackaged himself as a reformer. People don't remember, Veronique said. They remember the image. Not the facts. And he's built a hell of a new image. I didn't ask why she was telling me. I already knew, because when someone uses the tools of the powerful to rebuild a lie, you don't watch. You interrupt. I didn't want revenge. I wasn't interested in proving I was right, but I couldn't sit still knowing the man who left me at a gas station was now promising to lead people out of the dark. So I wrote one more thing, not a speech. Not a tell-all. A letter. To the people in his district. I wrote about the kind of leadership that only exists in crisis headlines and podium performances. I wrote about what happens when charm replaces consistency. I didn't name him. I didn't need to, and I didn't publish it under my name. I submitted it anonymously to a local newspaper. The kind of publication that still prints in broadsheet, still runs obituaries with full stories. They ran it on the front page. The fallout was fast. Not because of me. But because truth echoes louder when it has nothing to prove. A whistleblower came forward. Then another. Old files resurfaced. Deals Gregory had made under old aliases. Payoffs disguised as consulting fees, and finally, a photo of him. On the yacht. With the woman in the fishing line bikini, taken the night he sent me that message. You'll figure it out. You always do. The caption read, "Is this who we're trusting to figure it out for us?" He dropped out of the race 2 days later. I didn't celebrate. I didn't post. I didn't tell anyone. Instead, I sat at my small kitchen table with a cup of tea and a notebook. And I wrote one more story. This one was about a woman who didn't slay dragons, she taught them to build houses instead. The forge continued to grow. Elena's co-op launched its 5th program. Kayla became the youngest tech ethics consultant for a Fortune 100 company. Zariah's mentorship initiative went international, and I stayed in my quiet apartment, watching it all from the sidelines. Sometimes the biggest step forward is knowing when to step aside. One day, I got another postcard, different handwriting. This time, still forging. Still watching. No name. No city, just a single line drawn beneath it, like a signature without ego. I pinned it to the wall, not as proof, but as promise, because this movement, this moment, this legacy, it was. Never mind to keep. It was ours to carry. I didn't expect to cry when I walked past my old office, but I did, not the kind of cry you hide. The kind that comes slow, behind the eyes, like a tide pulling something soft out of you didn't know was still there. The building hadn't changed. Same polished glass. Same steel sign. Same revolving door spinning too fast, but everything inside me had. I hadn't come for nostalgia. I came because Melissa invited me to sit in on a roundtable, an advisory session for the new leadership collective GNH had quietly built since my departure. There were no titles on the nameplates, just first names and blank notebooks. That alone made me smile. When I entered the room, nobody stood up. Nobody tried to hand me a mic or rearrange the agenda. I was just another chair, and that, somehow, was the loudest kind of respect I'd ever received. The topic on the table that day, reparative leadership. A term they'd coined themselves. I listened as each person shared what that meant, making space without demanding credit. Rebuilding trust through policy, not apology. Fixing without flaunting. I scribbled the last one down in the margin of my notebook and circled it twice. Melissa led with grace I'd only seen sharpen since South Africa. She didn't speak to fill space, she spoke to make room. Halfway through, she turned to me. "Would you like to add anything?" I paused, then said, "Only this, power that requires a performance to exist isn't power. It's theater. What you're doing here isn't performance. It's repair." That evening, as we walked out of the building together, Melissa stopped me at the edge of the parking lot. "I found something," she said, reaching into her bag. "You left it in the desk drawer the day you walked away." It was the key. Gregory's old drawer key. The one with his initials etched in brass. She placed it in my palm. I looked at it for a long time, then dropped it in the storm drain beside us. We laughed like two women who'd built a house out of the very bricks once thrown at them. The next few weeks blurred into motion. I received more invitations than I could count, to panels, boards, awards I never asked for. But I said no to almost all of them, until one arrived from a university I'd never heard of. A state college in Montana, tiny. Underrated. Underfunded. They wanted me to deliver a commencement speech, not because of fame, because of impact. "You're who our students study when they ask what a non-traditional career looks like," the email read. "You remind them they don't have to become someone else to succeed." I said yes. The ceremony was held outdoors, beneath a sky so wide it made my lungs expand without permission. The stage was built on a borrowed truck bed. The sound system buzzed. The folding chairs wobbled, but the eyes watching me were clearer than any spotlight I'd ever stood under. I told them 3 things. First, you are not late. The timeline you've been fed is a myth. Arrive when you arrive. Then stay. Second, your voice is not a prototype. Don't shrink it to fit someone else's format. Third, do not let humility turn into disappearance. You're allowed to be proud. Loudly. When I stepped down, a student with paint on his jeans handed me a drawing. It was of a forge. Inside, a heart-shaped anvil. He didn't say anything. Just nodded. And walked away. I framed it. It hangs now above my desk, not in an office. In a shared studio space where I write. Where others paint. Where a musician practices on an old upright piano someone found on Craigslist. This is the place I built for myself. A room where nothing has to be monetized, where process is enough, where showing up isn't about proving. It's about being. Sometimes I still get asked, "Don't you miss it?" They mean the attention. The headlines. The clout, but I think about the girl with the cardboard sign. I think about Elena's warehouse, about Melissa's roundtable. Zariah's programs. Daniel's silence that always came before solutions. I don't miss it, because I never lost it. It just changed shape, and one night, as the sun poured through the studio windows in a way that made the dust look like dancing, I picked up my pen, not for an audience, just for me, and I wrote. I led a company once. Then I led a movement. But the greatest thing I ever did was believe in people before they believed in themselves. And that, more than any speech, any boardroom, any billion-dollar valuation, is what I'll carry with me, because the legacy we leave is not carved into buildings. It's carried in the way people walk after they've heard their own name spoken like it matters. There was a knock at the studio door one rainy afternoon, soft, hesitant, like someone unsure if they were meant to be heard. I was sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by torn notebook pages and tea that had long since gone cold. I'd been writing something half poem, half memoir, not for publication but for the kind of release that comes from naming your own turning points. The knock came again. I opened the door expecting a delivery, or maybe another artist from down the hall. Instead, it was her, the girl with the cardboard sign, only she wasn't a girl anymore. Older now, late teens, maybe 20. Braided hair, a denim jacket covered in patches, and that unmistakable mix of hope and history in her eyes. She held nothing in her hands. Just herself. I don't know if you remember me, she said. You spoke at my school. Years ago. I remembered. Come in, I said. She stepped inside and stood awkwardly by the door, like stepping fully in might break some invisible rule. I've been following what you've built, she said. The forge. Code Bloom. The letters. I didn't know how to reach you before. You just did, I said, gently. She exhaled, as if that single acknowledgement loosened something tightly knotted inside her. I'm studying social architecture, she said. Which isn't really a thing, except I think it should be. It is now, I replied. She smiled for the first time. I wrote something, she said, pulling a folded sheet of paper from her jacket pocket. Not because I want feedback. I just thought, you might want to see what you started. I unfolded the page. It was a manifesto, short, raw, electric with honesty. I want to build cities where apology isn't the first language. I want to create rooms where decisions aren't made by who speaks loudest. I want people to walk into work and feel like they've come home, not to a place, but to themselves. I looked up. Her eyes were waiting, but not desperate. I don't know if it's any good, she added. It's not good, I said. She blinked. It's necessary. She laughed, but her voice cracked. Do you ever wonder if any of it mattered? I didn't have to think, no. I used to. But not anymore. Because I've met too many people like you. We sat together for a while, saying little, drinking reheated tea. Before she left, she asked if she could take a photo. Not for social, she clarified. Just for me. To remember this happened. She didn't take a selfie. She took a photo of the space, the desk, the paper, the window light. Later, I would realize what she really wanted was proof that the woman she'd admired could live a quiet life without disappearing. After she left, I sat with her manifesto in my lap. And I knew I needed to share it. Not with the world, but with the next class at the Forge. I called Zaraya. I want to start a new program, I said. Less about leadership. More about legacy. Not what they'll build. But how they'll be remembered. Call it Echo, she said, instantly. Because that's what you've always done. Made people echo. We launched it 3 months later. The curriculum was unlike anything we'd done. There were no slides. No tests, just questions. Who raised your voice when you couldn't? What rooms have you left quieter than you found them? If your name disappeared, what would remain? Each participant was tasked with writing a living legacy, not a resume, but a ripple map. Who they've touched. Who they've moved. Who moved them. It changed us all. People we'd trained years ago returned to help teach it. Kayla hosted a session on invisible inheritance, the emotional intelligence passed from mentor to mentee, not through lectures, but through presence. Elena brought in artifacts from her co-op, broken headphones from their first donation drive, a brick from their original warehouse, a mug that had somehow survived every funding drought. I gave each Echo cohort a copy of the manifesto.no credit line.no. Author name, just the words. I want people to walk into work and feel like they've come home, not to a place, but to themselves. At the close of the pilot, one of the youngest students stood up and said, I used to think legacy was what you leave behind. But now I think it's what walks beside you. That became our slogan, printed on the walls, woven into welcome packets, tattooed, literally, on the forearm of a graduate named Riley, who sent us a photo with the caption, so I don't forget whose shoulders I stand on. That year, I returned to the original Forge location. The building was the same, but fuller now. Art lined the hallways. Bulletin boards overflowed with handwritten notes, postcards, Polaroids. I walked past a classroom and heard a new instructor explain to a group of students, this place doesn't teach you to speak louder. It teaches you how to speak without leaving bruises. I stood there, unseen, and wept, because what we had built was no longer a program. It was a language, and people were speaking it fluently, not in my voice. I in theirs. The first time I saw someone quote my words on a wall I hadn't touched, I froze, not because it was misused, but because it was more beautiful than I ever imagined it could be. The quote was from an old panel talk, something I barely remembered. Saying, you don't have to scream to be heard. You just have to stop whispering like you're asking for permission. It was spray painted on a concrete barrier near a bus stop in New Jersey. Someone had added flowers around it. I saw a picture of it on a random blog, buried deep beneath an unrelated article about public art, and I stared at it for a long time. I didn't feel proud. I felt quiet, because that's the thing about echoes, they go places you never meant to send them. And they grow taller when someone else gives them roots. I didn't share the photo. Didn't tell anyone. I saved it in a folder on my desktop titled Reminders. It sat beside screenshots of letters from students, drawings from young women in Code Bloom, and one blurry photo of a crooked hallway sign that someone had crossed out and replaced with a sticky note. This is where the future begins. Those were the metrics I cared about now, not revenue, not expansion. Resonance. One evening, while cleaning out old papers, I found a draft email I'd never sent. It was written to Gregory.no. Subject line. Just one sentence. You taught me the cost of silence. So I paid it forward, with interest. I never sent it. I never would. He didn't need that. Truth.it wasn't for him. It was for me. I deleted it, and in its place, I wrote a message to an address I didn't even know existed yet, a new director's inbox at a Forge site opening in Atlanta. I said, don't replicate, reinvent, keep the bones, change the blood. Let your version sing in a different key. They replied the same night, already writing the melody. By then, we'd trained over 1,000 people. More than half were now training others. Our curriculum was being adapted into programs in South America, Southeast Asia, and rural Canada, but I kept my circle small. Studio, garden, letters, until a surprise invitation arrived from an old friend. Daniel. He was organizing a private summit, no press, no panels, just 10 people, each building something bigger than themselves. The subject line read, "Time to reconnect the architects." I almost said no, not because I didn't want to go, but because I'd grown so used to quiet. I was afraid of what noise might undo, but something inside me whispered, go. The summit was held in a lakeside lodge, thick with pine and the smell of old wood. There were no agendas. Just stories. One woman had built a company that translated trauma support into 20 dialects. One man was rebuilding economic infrastructure in a town that had been flooded twice. Another was starting a grief library. They didn't talk about what they led, they talked about what they learned, and for the first time in years, I let myself tell the story, not the curated one. The whole one. The betrayal, the fear, the gas station, the email, the shoes in my hand, the first boardroom, the drawer key, the girl with the sign, the manifesto, the anvil-shaped heart. I told it all, and at the end, no one clapped. They stood, not out of awe, out of recognition. We had all built in darkness. And we were all, now, making light. After the summit, I stayed in touch with every one of them. We formed a circle, informal, unbranded. Just a thread of messages, check-ins, resources. We called it Hearth, because we weren't building empires. We were building warmth. That winter, I returned to the Forge one more time. Not as a guest. Not to teach, just to observe. They didn't know I was coming. I slipped into the back of a class mid-session. The instructor was using a quote I'd never heard before: when people feel safe, they stop performing and start becoming. I leaned over and asked the student next to me who said that. She shrugged. Some woman. Long time ago. And I smiled, because anonymity is not the absence of value. It's the proof that something was strong enough to let go of your name and still move forward. When the class ended, I left quietly. The air was cold. My hands bare, but my chest was full, and I knew the work was still alive, not just in buildings. In bodies. In breath. In the space between what we survive and what we build next. In the echo of a sentence no longer needing to be repeated, because someone new is already speaking it, louder, wiser, and fully their own. One morning, deep in the middle of a February that arrived with the weight of silence and frost, I received a message that made me stop mid-step in my kitchen. It was short. Just a name of Claire, then a second line. She says she knew you once. Says you saved her without knowing. I stared at the screen for a full minute. Then I sat down. Claire. I hadn't heard that name in almost 15 years. She had been my intern. A summer shadow, always dressed in muted tones, never spoke unless prompted. She disappeared after 3 months. Quiet exit. No farewell. I'd looked her up a year later and found nothing. It was as if the world had swallowed her whole. Now, suddenly, she had surfaced again. The message had come from someone at a small nonprofit, an arts literacy project in Cleveland. Claire had volunteered there. She told them I had once left her a note in her desk drawer after a particularly difficult meeting. A note I barely remembered writing: you don't have to be louder than them. You just have to be clearer with yourself. Apparently, she kept it folded, worn, taped inside the spine of her planner for over a decade. They invited me to visit. Not as a keynote. Not as a name, just as a witness. So I went. The building was an old library turn center, creaky floorboards and windows that didn't quite seal. But the warmth inside was unmistakable. Paintings by children lined the walls. Piles of books in every corner. Laughter echoing from rooms not far away. Claire met me in the main hall. She was taller now. Her presence steadier. But the eyes were the same. "I never forgot you," she said. "I'm glad you didn't," I replied. "I was afraid I'd been too late." She shook her head. "You were the first person who didn't try to fix me. You just saw me. And then you left the light on." We sat for hours. Tea growing cold in our hands. She told me about the years she spent trying to erase herself in corporate settings that never deserved her brilliance. About the breakdown that brought her here. And the breakthrough that kept her. "I'm not rebuilding," she said. "I'm building new." And I believed her. She walked me through the center. Introduced me to the kids, the staff. Let me watch a session where teenagers read poems they'd written and wept without shame. One boy said, "My voice used to shake. Now it sings." Claire looked over at me and whispered, "Sound familiar?" I left with a book of their writing. She slipped it into my bag when I wasn't looking. Inside, a handwritten note. "Sometimes the smallest matches light the longest fires." I cried in the airport. No reason to hide it anymore. Back home, I started collecting all the letters, quotes, and post-its I'd gathered over the years. Not for a memoir, for a time capsule. Point one that wouldn't be buried. Point one that would be passed forward. I called it Voices We Leave Open. Zariah helped design the format. Elena contributed stories. Melissa wrote a foreword. We didn't publish it traditionally. We printed 50 copies. Each recipient had to agree to give it away within 1 year, to someone younger, someone unsure, someone ready. No sales. No signatures. Just a ripple. Point one of the copies ended up in the hands of a teacher in rural Maine. She sent me a letter 2 months later. I read it to my class. A boy who hasn't spoken all semester raised his hand and said, "I think I've been waiting for this." The Forge added it to their orientation kits. Hearth adopted a version for their onboarding program. I printed another copy. Kept it on my kitchen table. As a reminder, that sometimes, the story isn't ours to finish. It's ours to begin. Months passed, spring came. I started teaching writing again, unofficially. A small group. 5 women. Some older, some barely out of high school. We met every Thursday in the studio. We didn't talk about technique. We talked about thresholds. The moment you realize you can say something you thought the world wasn't ready to hear. Point 1 week, we talked about first lines. I asked them to write the sentence they'd never dared to say out loud. Point 1 woman wrote, "I've never loved myself without apology." Another wrote, "I keep waiting for permission to be real." And another, "My anger deserves a microphone, not a muzzle." We read them aloud. We did not edit. After class, one of them lingered. "You don't write to be seen anymore, do you?" she asked. "No," I said. "I write to make others visible." She nodded. "That's the kind of writer I want to be." And I told her the truth. "You already are." That night, I looked at the wall in my studio, the one with the pinned photos, notes, quotes, the map of ripples I'd quietly tracked over the years. I saw her face there. Claire's, the boy in Maine, the girl with the cardboard sign. My own, in a faded photo from that night at the gas station. I looked at all of them. And I whispered, "Not for them, but for me. We are not echoes anymore. We are the sound that came first." By late summer, the studio became more than a sanctuary. It became a seedbed. People began to gather there, not because I advertised, but because they heard, through whispers, notes passed in cafes, the quiet pulse of shared testimony, that it was a place where things began. It started with the writers, then came the teachers. Then the healers, the midwives of other people's strength. One brought a guitar. One brought fabric. One just brought silence and waited for it to turn into something. We called it the listening room. No entry fee. No introductions. No rules but one, speak only when you've listened first. It met every other Tuesday, and over time, it became a heartbeat. Stories emerged from that room that would never fit in reports. A former corporate attorney read a lullaby she wrote for her mother, who'd never been told she was allowed to rest. A young man told us the first thing he ever built was a raft out of soda bottles and grief. Someone recited an apology they'd written to their teenage self. We never clapped. We just nodded. That nod became our benediction. I didn't lead those sessions. I opened the door. Then I stepped back, and that was the greatest lesson of all. Sometimes leadership is the architecture of absence, making space, holding silence, letting others claim the air. I began to understand that legacy isn't built in the moments we speak. It's built in how well we listen after we no longer need to be heard. Then, one evening, just after the last light faded, I got a letter, handwritten, from a prison in Oregon. The sender's name was Maya. She'd read about the Forge in a donated newspaper. A counselor had shown her a paragraph about our program on echo leadership. She had no access to a computer. Just paper, a pen, and time. Her letter was 6 pages. She told me about the mistake she made when she was 20. The system that ground her name down to numbers. The years she spent trying to rewrite herself in margins no one was reading, and then she wrote this: "I don't expect you to write back. I just needed someone to know that I still have a voice, even if the world hears it through walls. I wrote back the same day. She replied 3 weeks later. We kept writing, and with her permission, I started reading her letters aloud at the listening room. They came alive there. They didn't feel like confinement, they felt like testimony. Eventually, we invited others to write to her. Not charity. Not pity. Just dialogue. Solidarity. We created a project called Windows. We paired storytellers on the outside with those on the inside. Each pair shared stories. Each story was recorded, audio, handwritten, sometimes just wordless. Sketches. We didn't edit them. We archived them. Zariah helped digitize the first batch. Elena designed a system so they could be streamed into waiting rooms, schools, public libraries. No names. Just the stories. The tagline was simple: what we build inside us matters, even if the world tries to lock it away. Maya's story, her real, unvarnished, unmarketable story, ended up in a middle school library in Detroit. One day, a student emailed us. She wrote, "I listened to the story about Maya. It made me stop blaming myself for being the daughter of someone like her. It made me want to forgive. And write. And stay." Maya wept when I read her that email. She didn't ask who sent it, she just said, "That's how I know I exist." We'd always said our work was about building. But this was resurrection. The listening room expanded. One in New York. One in Sao Paulo. One in Nairobi, all different, all the same heartbeat. I visited each one. Not to teach. Just to witness. To feel the electricity of honesty without spectacle. To sit in a chair and say nothing and still feel spoken to. At the Sao Paulo gathering, a woman approached me after a session. She was carrying a small, weathered notebook. "This belonged to my mother," she said. "She never met you. But she heard your voice on a podcast once and wrote your words inside this." She flipped to the page. "You said, we don't need more heroes. We need more hearths." Then she handed me the notebook. "I think she wanted you to have it." I took it with both hands, carefully, reverently, because sometimes, what we give the world comes back not as praise, but as inheritance, and that is the truest measure, not what we keep, but what is kept after us. The days blurred into one another in the cabin. No clocks. No meetings. No introductions to prepare or names to memorize. Just the scent of earth after rain, the rustle of trees speaking in a dialect older than memory. I didn't miss the noise, but I did begin to wonder about the silence between all the goodbyes I hadn't said. I wrote letters I didn't send. To people I'd outgrown. To names I only remembered by the bruises they left. Not to reopen wounds, but to give them context. One letter read, "You didn't break me. You gave me blueprints." Another, "I wasn't difficult. I was discerning. You just weren't ready to meet someone who wouldn't shrink for your comfort." And one more, "Thank you for leaving. I had more space to move." These weren't declarations. They were closures. Unlocked quietly, with no fanfare. I burned them in the fire pit outside. The wind carried their ashes into the forest, let the trees hold them, and then, one morning, a sound interrupted everything. A knock. No one had knocked on my door in weeks. I opened it slowly. It was Daniel. He didn't speak at first. Just stood there, holding a bag of oranges and a folder. "I figured," he said finally, "if I brought something heavy and something light, you might open the door." I smiled. Let him in. We didn't talk for an hour. Just shared slices of orange, let the peelings curl into a bowl like flowers wilting with grace. Then he opened the folder. Inside, plans, new programs. Initiative. Spaces opening in countries where access wasn't just a challenge, it was a myth. Regions no one wanted to start with. Places that had been stamped as too complicated, too unstable. I read through it slowly. There, in the margins of one page, a scribble in blue ink, she said, "Start here." So we did. I closed the folder. Looked at Daniel. "You don't need me to lead this." He nodded. "We want you to bless it." That word hit differently, not approved. Blessed. As if what I'd created had shifted from blueprint to belief. I leaned back, eyes on the beams above. "I'll come," I said. But not to speak, to witness. And so began the pilgrimage, not to sacred places, but to sacred stories. We visited a converted train station in Buenos Aires, where women who'd escaped trafficking now ran a co-op. They made shoes with soles that contained affirmations, printed in heat-reactive ink. When the sun warmed them, they said things like, "I survived." And, "I walk on my own terms." In Morocco, we found a school built on what used to be a landfill. The children there didn't raise their hands to answer. They stood. They spoke. And then they sat. In Ukraine, even amid rubble, someone had carved my quote, "You don't have to scream to be heard," into a wall that barely stood. The letters were jagged. Defiant. Still. In Iceland, I sat in a geothermal greenhouse with a young woman who had translated my manifesto into Braille. She gave me a copy. I ran my fingers across it. For the first time, I understood what it Meant to read with more than eyes, each place was a flame, not borrowed. Relit. Daniel didn't speak much during those travels. But every time I looked over, he was watching, not me, but the people. He was measuring something invisible, the depth of impact where no metric existed. In a village in South India, we met a group of girls who had started an underground radio station. They broadcast poetry and weather reports and messages to women who weren't allowed to leave their homes. One said, "We don't have frequencies. We have courage." Another added, "And that's louder." I left them with a recorder. I carried in my bag. I didn't tell them what to do with it. I didn't have to, they knew. On the flight back, Daniel finally spoke. "You've created a language," he said. "And they're fluent in it." I rested my head against the window. I didn't teach it. I just stopped translating myself. We landed in early autumn. The air carried the taste of smoke and apples. I returned to the cabin. But something had shifted. I didn't need to hide anymore. I needed to root. So I bought land, not to build another center. To grow a sanctuary, not for programs, for pause. It would have open grounds, wildflowers, books tucked in trees, a circular path that looped but never ended, and stones carved with quotes from people no one had ever heard of. No signs, no logos, just a plaque at the entrance, "Come in quiet. Leave louder." It would take time, but I wasn't in a rush. I'd already arrived. Now, I was building a welcome, and somewhere in the soil, I knew their names would grow with me: Claire, Maya, Elena, Azariah, Kayla, Devin, the boy with the crooked smile from Detroit, the girl who cried without apology, the woman who painted shoes, the daughters of the unheard, and the sons of the never seen, all of them, here always. The first time someone arrived at the sanctuary before I did, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, nervous. She was sitting beneath the crooked ash tree near the front path. A suitcase beside her. A book in her lap. Wind brushing her curls. I didn't recognize her at first. She looked up. "Is this the place where the silence listens back?" I smiled. "That depends on what you're willing to say." She nodded once, then looked away, like she hadn't expected a yes. Her name was Nova. 23. Fresh out of a trauma counseling program. Burnt out before she'd even begun. "I was told this place doesn't fix," she said. "It makes space." "That's the truth," I replied. "We don't repair. We remember." She stayed 2 weeks. Helped organize the seed shed. Painted poems on the underside of leaves. One morning, I found a line carved gently into the bark of a birch: "The future doesn't whisper. It waits." When she left, she didn't say goodbye. She just pressed a folded note into my palm. It read, "I thought healing was loud. But maybe it's just a softer kind of strength." More came after her, not crowds. Just arrivals. One at a time. As if summoned not by marketing, but by murmur, they came from everywhere. An ex-pastor who wanted to relearn prayer without guilt. A dancer who hadn't moved since her mother died. A girl who spoke only in riddles. Until someone finally listened long enough to solve one. There was no schedule. No retreats. No transformation promised, just trees, firelight, journals. A path that circled itself and never demanded progress. One afternoon, I found a stone near the garden with a new phrase carved into it: "I am not what broke me. I am what I built after." No one admitted to carving it. No one needed to. It belonged to all of us. I started hosting dusk circles. We sat under the ash tree, wrapped in quilts, crickets stitching the silence. Each circle had a single question: "What have you unlearned? Who were you before they told you who to be? What do you no longer apologize for?" Answers came slow. Sometimes wordless. Sometimes tears. Sometimes laughter that cracked something loose. The rule was simple: speak only if it doesn't hurt more to keep it in. Some nights, no one spoke at all. Those were often the most sacred. One night, I asked, "What would you say to your younger self if they appeared right now?" Nova had returned by then. She answered first. "I'd tell her she doesn't have to earn rest." Others followed. "You are not too much. You are too uncontained for small minds. You can survive. But you're allowed to thrive. I'm sorry it took this long. But I'm here now." When the circle ended, someone whispered, "This is what church should have been." And I felt that in my spine. Not worship. Witness, not salvation. Stillness. Then, one morning, I received a package. Inside, a journal. No return name. Just initials, GH. I opened it slowly. The first page read, "I watched from afar. I hated you for building what I never had the courage to imagine." The entries that followed were erratic. Angry. Then sad. Then quiet. There were no apologies, just reckoning. One line stood out: "You were right. Leadership isn't power. It's presence." I didn't reply. There was no return address, but I placed the journal on the shelf in the reading nook labeled, "Unfinished Conversations." The next day, a guest sat there for hours, reading through it. She left a note: "Sometimes truth is delivered in broken handwriting." The sanctuary became its own kind of library, not of books. Of testimonies, jars of confessions, stones of wisdom, leaves with poems, quilts stitched with questions. Someone hung a sign on the front gate: "This is not a place. It's a becoming." Every word, every offering, became part of the architecture. We didn't need bricks. We had breath, and every now and then, when no one was looking, I'd walk the looped path at dusk, and I'd speak aloud the names of the women who built me, not for memory, but for continuity. So that the soil would know who to grow next, and who to welcome when they finally arrived, because this wasn't my legacy anymore. It was theirs, and I was just tending the garden until it bloomed them whole. The first frost came early that year. It dressed the trees in lace and left silver trails on the sanctuary's windows, as though the night had written secrets no one else could see. I woke to the stillness, the kind of stillness that wraps around your lungs and tells you to listen before you move, and in that silence, I realized it was time to open the archive, not the one made of paper and print, but the living one, the stories we'd collected, not stored. I called Elena, Zariah, Maya, Claire, Veronique, even Kayla. I told them we needed to gather again. Not to plan, not to build, but to remember. We chose the solstice, the longest night. It felt right to honor the darkness, not as something to fear, but as something we'd walked through. The sanctuary was ready, firewood stacked, paths lit with lanterns made from old jam jars, quilts draped over benches. Tea. Steeped in silence, they arrived one by one. No fanfare, just presence. When Maya stepped onto the land, she whispered, "This feels like stepping into someone else's prayer." We gathered around the fire as the sky swallowed its last light. And one by one, we opened the archive, not with folders, with voice. Kayla read from her journal, "I used to think I had to prove I deserved space. Now I take it. And make more for others." Claire shared a letter a student had written to her. "You didn't teach me to be brave. You taught me that I already was." Zariah held up a photograph, two young girls dancing barefoot in a field of chalk messages that said things like, "I matter even when I'm quiet." She said, "They wrote those after listening to a story about you, Maya." Maya's eyes glistened, and then she stood. "I have something," she said. From her bag, she pulled out a small wooden box, inside, letters from the women she'd met while incarcerated. Each one folded into a different shape, an origami of survival. She chose one. Opened it slowly. It read, "I haven't seen the moon in years. But your words make me feel like it still sees me." No one spoke. We didn't need to. We knew. We were no longer keeping stories. We were keeping each other. Later that night, as the fire settled into embers, Claire asked me, "What do we call this?" I thought for a long time, then I said, "Continuum." Because this wasn't a summit, or a reunion, or a celebration. It was what happens when legacy forgets its ego and becomes ecosystem. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked the sanctuary paths alone. The frost crunching underfoot. My breath a rhythm. My mind heavy with all the echoes we'd inherited, transformed, and sent forward. Near the ash tree, I found a new carving in the trunk. We were never meant to end, only to extend. The handwriting looked like Nova's. I smiled. The next morning, we had a closing circle. Each person was given a stone point. One by one, they spoke a word into it, a word they wanted to plant in the world. Then we walked the looped path and placed the stones where they felt most at home. I walked last, held my stone for a long while, then whispered into it, "Enough." Because that was the truth. I had given enough, built enough, held enough, lost enough, become enough, and in that declaration, I made space for more than myself. I placed the stone near the garden. Beside it, someone had already laid another, "Begin." And together, those two words formed a sentence I didn't know I'd needed. "You are enough to begin." We packed up slowly, hugged long, promised nothing but presence. Before she left, Zariah pulled me aside. "You know they'll keep coming, right?" I nodded. "Let them. Will you stay?" I looked around, the path, the stones, the sky painted with morning's promise. "I'll stay until the garden tells me it's time to bloom elsewhere." Because movement wasn't my measure anymore, meaning was, and I had found it here. In frost.in. Fire.in. The hands that reached without asking to be held first.in. The stories that didn't ask to be told perfectly, just honestly. This was no longer my story. It never really had been. It was ours, and we had written it in a language no one could take from us, because it was spoken in soul, and planted in soil, and it would keep growing, even long after we were gone. The last morning arrived like a hush. There was no announcement, no grand finale. Just birdsong breaking through fog, the soft rustle of wind passing secrets between branches. I opened the door of the sanctuary cabin barefoot, coffee warm in my palms, and felt the kind of stillness that comes not from absence, but from wholeness. I walked the path slowly, each stone still where it had been placed. Each word etched with care. Enough. Begin. Listen. Flame. Welcome. Breathed out. I stopped by the ash tree, now dotted with notes in tiny glass jars tied with twine. Visitors had left them over the seasons, some written in ink, some in crayon, some carved into cloth. One simply read, "This saved me." Another, "I remembered who I was here." I didn't open them all. I didn't need to, they weren't mine to keep. That's when the knock came, not the kind you hear, but the kind you feel, a pull at the base of your ribs, an awareness that something is arriving, not to take, but to remind. It was a woman. Maybe 60. Maybe older. Face like wind-smoothed stone. She carried no bag, just a small wooden box pressed to her chest. I invited her in, she declined. "I just came to return something." She handed me the box, inside, a bundle of letters. Dozens of them. Some decades old. Some barely sealed. "I've carried these since I was a girl," she said. "They were never meant for me. Just through me." I asked if she wanted to stay. She smiled. "I've already stayed too long where I wasn't seen. But I wanted to leave them somewhere they could breathe." She turned to go, then paused. "You didn't just build a place," she said. "You built a pause in the world." And then she was gone. I brought the letters to the hearth and sat on the floor. I opened one at random. "Dear future me, I hope you forgive yourself before anyone else does." Another, "If you're reading this, you survived. Don't let that be the end of the story." I lit a candle. Not for ritual. For reminder. Then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I wrote a letter of my own. To the woman I once was. To the one who stood at a gas station in heels that cut too deep, watching a car disappear and thinking it was the end. To the one who once believed power looked like control, and that softness was a liability. To the one who answered cruelty with silence and mistook survival for success. I wrote, "You were never broken. You were becoming. You didn't lose him. You found you didn't fall apart. You fell open, and every door they slammed was just proof you'd outgrown their hallway. Look around you now, look what you're now made space for, look what your voice built. You are not the echo, you are the sound that shook the walls." I folded the letter, placed it in the wooden box, and added it to the shelf beneath the ash tree. There was nothing left to prove, only something left to pass on. Later that evening, just as the sky dipped into its soft indigo morning, a girl arrived. 14. Maybe 15. No explanation. Just wide eyes and a journal clutched tight. She didn't speak for hours. Just walked the sanctuary. Read the stones. Sat in the nook and cried without wiping her cheeks. When I finally approached, she looked at me and asked, "Can I leave something behind?" I nodded. She pulled a single page from her journal, folded it, placed it in the jar beneath the ash tree. Then she said, "I don't want to disappear." I whispered, "You won't." Because this place would hold her now, just like it held me, just like it would hold whoever came next. The sanctuary wasn't made of stone or wood or path. It was made of decision. Of refusal. Of soft rebellion and brave becoming. It was a place for voices that had been told they were too much, too soft, too angry, too late, and now, it was full of them, singing. And on the final page of my journal, I wrote, "This is how it ends, not in applause. In arrival, not in silence. In song." 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.